West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
I'm probably going to declare the fifth, not because I've done anything wrong, but because these people are political criminals that have an axe to grind.
I'm going to make a decision between now and December 17th based on the advice of my counsel, but it's very dangerous to go into this forum because they are not honest. This is a partisan witch hunt.
Partisan witch hunt. You just saw Trump flunkies Alex Jones and Roger Stone were just two of nearly a dozen new subpoenas issued by the January 6th House Select Committee this week. Now, these investigations into Trump world's highest ranks and their connections to the Capitol insurrection seem to grow by the hour. But this week, Gerald Saib of the Wall Street Journal described the three other I words the GOP hopes will distract mostly Republican voters ahead of next November's midterms. That's inflation, identity politics, what they call identity politics, and immigration. And just like a laser pen with a cat, it will likely work with their voters. Joining me now, Dr. Jason Johnson, professor of politics and journalism at Morgan State University, MSNBC political contributor, and my nemesis. Also joining us, Lucy Caldwell, political strategist and former campaign manager for Joe Walsh's 2020 presidential campaign. Lucy, first of all, happy belated Thanksgiving to both of you, my friends. But Lucy, I have to start with you because you're not in the Republican Party anymore. And I love our conversations because I feel like you're just as outraged as many of us as you see the Republican Party openly embrace a lot of things that they've trafficked in for a long time. I have to ask, though, because you still talk to Republicans, I'd imagine. I don't understand how the GOP can run on anything other than, hey, guys, sorry we tried to overthrow the government and the will of the people, and we're really working on not being the party of white supremacy. Yet, I fear that these three I's will actually work with their base voters. What do you think?
Well, I think it's true. I think there is evidence to suggest it will work with their base voters. And that's in part based on how Democrats respond to these Republican talking points. I mean, when you look at someone like Steve Bannon being indicted a few weeks ago, he did it live streamed. He pled not guilty. He did a big parade. He, had tens of millions of people downloading his live stream all over the country because that is the power of the Trump cult, right? But I think that Democrats often, when they're addressing would-be voters, and no one's going to like to hear me say this, but everyone has a vote that counts. They are treating moderate voters as though they are part of the Trump cult and you are either with the Trump cult or you're not. Now, I am, as you say, a former Republican, and my litmus test for a candidate is, do you completely repudiate Trump and Trumpism and the proto-fascism that is today's Republican Party? Unfortunately, the Republicans I talk to, even those who are, say, would-be Biden voters, they do not feel that way going into 2022. They're not thinking about that as they think ahead to 2024. And so this is a matter of really appealing to their better angels. So we're asking them to do something that's hard. We're asking them to do something uncomfortable. You mentioned the identity politics. That's a huge issue. We need to run into those issues and say, why do you feel like things are changing in the ways that your children are being taught in schools? How can we have a conversation about that? Could we appeal to your sense of maybe a better way? Because unfortunately, you're with Trump, you're against Trump, you're for democracy, you're not for democracy. That's not working. So we have to find a new way to appeal to those would-be centrist voters, because at the end of the day, they're all going to go turn out and vote.
Yeah. And, honestly, Lucy, we have to be honest about identity politics, because when we say things like NASCAR dads or soccer moms, all the euphemisms that the media has for traditionally white voters, that's also identity politics. And it shouldn't be that hard. But I understand the Republican Party has a lot of hard work to do. Jason, what concerns me is what happens in 2022 when the next batch of elections happen and the Republican Party doesn't want to accept those results. Even when you look at like the state legislatures, state houses across this country, they don't have the same security and protection that Capitol Hill does. And some of these like members of Congress, they're not walking around with Secret Service when they're in their districts. We've seen this open embrace of violence by the Republican Party. This is something that even our own intel agencies have cited as a problem. How concerned should we be about that?
Well, Tiffany, the biggest concern that I have about 2022, I will beat this drum like Questlove, Sheila E., whatever. I'm just going to beat this drum. If nothing is done about federal voting rights, it doesn't matter. Right? Yeah. If Democrats in the Senate can't figure out what to do with the filibuster and implement some laws that can actually protect people's right to vote and have those votes counted, then all of this is sort of moot. So that's the first thing. Now, the secondary issue, as you said, yes, are we going to have some issues at the state level? Very likely. In Georgia, in North Carolina, in Florida, you're going to have issues where local officials are trying to play with these numbers. They're going to have issues where voting machines don't work in Texas. All of those things are actually common. But if there is not federal law implemented, then there will be no remedy. That's the issue. We know what the Republican game plan is going to be, but the Democrats seem absolutely insistent on running a track race in sneakers while the Republicans are on motorcycles. And so until that gets fixed, I try not to get too caught up in the individual details of this level of violence or this level of threat, because if you don't use the power that you have to guarantee free and open elections, it won't matter what tricks the Republicans want to pull next year.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful point, Jason, because, a lot of this is happening within the Republican Party, trafficking and voter suppression schemes all across the country that narrows the path to the ballot box. But, Lucy, I do want to talk a little bit about what's happening in the Republican Party. Take a listen to this wild exchange between Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene, who apparently has never met a member of QAnon that she didn't like. Take a listen. We'll talk about it on the other side.
Kevin McCarthy has a problem in our conference. He doesn't have the full support to be speaker. He doesn't have the votes that are there, because there's many of us that are very unhappy about the failure to hold Republicans accountable, while conservatives like me, Paul Gosar, and many others just constantly take the abuse by the Democrats.
Lucy, I have to tell you, look, there's a lot of voter suppression and people will have to leapfrog over that. But the scary part is if they don't, Kevin McCarthy could potentially be Speaker of the House. More scary, Trump could be Speaker of the House, because technically the Speaker of the House does not have to be a member of Congress. What happens if that happens? One, they're both an apologist for the party's white supremacy, sexism, violence, the attempt for the coup. The January 6th investigation could go away. They haven't said anything about Gosar, who tweeted a murder fantasy of AOC. How concerned are the Republicans you still talk to that Trump could be Speaker of the House, or that McCarthy, who is a Trump acolyte at this point, could also be Speaker?
The problem with Republicans today is that even though the core of the Republican Party, the power nucleus of, say, the RNC, may not love it when Marjorie Taylor Greene says the things she says, or Matt Gaetz says the stuff he says, or Gosar tweets the crazy stuff he tweets, they all are part of the ends justify the means crowd. And you see that all over. You see that with candidates like J.D. Vance, people who were one-time never Trump folks who are now all in on MAGA. They're fine with saying the quiet part out loud, and there is still a core of the Republican Party that perhaps doesn't stylistically love someone like Paul Gosar, but is going to continue to hang with them because they are an ends justify the means party, and it's headed nowhere good. it may be dwindling, and we may see the Republican Party losing some of its influence, but it's not losing its influence fast enough. And as Jason says, Democrats have to meet the moment in a way that they just have not been.
And, you know, the Republican Party might be losing their influence, but they're not losing power. Jason, we're over time, but I have to ask you this question because I think it counts when you vote down ballot. And all the Republicans who say, well, we didn't like Trump's language, but we liked his policies. I mean, these are things that perpetuate the systemic problems. So when you have something like, are you going to vote for Marco Rubio, who's a Trump acolyte, over Val Demings? Are you going to vote for J.D. Vance over someone like a Morgan Harper or Tim Ryan? J.D. Vance is now a Trump acolyte. Or Herschel Walker, for crying out loud, over a Raphael Warnock. I mean, how can Republicans, is the solution to appeal to them or leapfrog over them and get out the base and make sure that the base can leapfrog over voter suppression schemes? I'm just lost at this point.
The DNC is now run by Jamie Harrison, who, if the Democrats in the White House let him do his job, he is the number one person. He's probably the best head of the DNC in 15 years who actually knows what needs to be done to win in some of these Southern and Sun Belt states, despite the fact that he was not able to beat Lindsey Graham. Look, the base is there. The voters are there. The enthusiasm is there. The argument is there. All you got to do is run an ad saying, hey, this person here didn't want you to get shots in the arm, and this person here was in favor of people getting shot in the White House during January 6th. All the advertising is done. It is simply a matter of having the organization from the top in the Democratic Party to win these races. Nobody in their right mind wants Herschel Walker, and nobody in their right mind thinks that Marco Rubio is more competent than Val Demings. But if you don't have a party that organizes behind these kinds of issues and isn't chasing around on silly identity politics, which everybody knows is a dog whistle for white racism, instead of just saying most kids are particularly happy to learn about Diwali in school and have new friends that come home and learn things, if you don't have a party that's organized correctly, then none of that will matter. So, look, there's plenty of strong Democratic candidates out there. You got to have a strong and unfettered and unhamstrung DNC behind them in order to push towards victory next year.
It is Monday, the 29th of November of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is River City Hash Mondays. Yes, we've had a weekend, and now it's Monday. Isn't that the nature of things? Isn't it? Well, we did have a weekend, and it was chock full of news, least of which is still the uproar over Kamala Harris buying a pan in Paris. Okay, well, the people complaining about Kamala buying cookware don't season their food. And they see nothing wrong with spending, how much money is it? $80,000 or so for these monster maggot trucks that they drive around like they're ISIS? Let alone the pleasure craft. I'm not quite ready to call what they have as yachts. But they've got some, 35 to 50 foot vessels that they have no problem swamping and sinking. And then they got to pay to get it fished out. They can't just let it lay there at the bottom of the lake or the estuary or wherever it is that they get swamped and sink their vessels. They have enough money for that. And they're complaining about Kamala Harris, a black woman, by the way, buying a pan that might be considered nice. She can't have nice things. What? You're poor and you eat meat? My God. And if you call them racist, which is what they are, they will, you see what's happening. He said, you calling me a racist? Well, I'm going to show you how much of a Nazi I am. And they are. So let this be a lesson. If you're in a group of people and you look to the right of you and somebody has a t-shirt on that says 6 million wasn't enough, and then you look to the left of you and somebody's wearing a t-shirt that says Hitler was right, I think you could surmise that you're in the wrong crowd. Okay? And you might want to get out of there. Unless you're one of them. Then why would you want to get out of there? You want to be there. I would still argue that you want to get out of there. Because what I do know of the Nazis is that they also kill their own. Anyone that might threaten whatever position a Nazi has at the time. Oh, there's somebody that looks like they're a leading light in the movement. We got to kill them. And, because the Nazis did, and they still do. It's the mindset of the Nazi. And I have no problem with punching the Nazi. You punch him in the wallet, you punch him with the law, and I would say you just punch Nazis for merely being Nazis. I don't know why there's not a law that prevents Nazis from being in office. Geez, they sure shamed anybody who might be a commie from running. And I just really love it now that the Nazis feel so emboldened they can call Eisenhower policy types commies. Just like the Birchers did back in the day. When you live long enough, you not only have been taught history, you remember history. And then it's just really difficult to impart that knowledge to those who have not really as much experience with it because they weren't there. And there's an article out now about the GOP following the Bircher playbook, as if that's news. They've been doing this forever. Yeah, there were elements in the GOP that said, we got to keep those extremists at bay. They did a good job, didn't they? And look where we are. Tea Party, Birchers. Everybody's got to realize that. In fact, I brought up the fact that the Tea Party was Birchers, and people said, Birchers don't exist anymore. Yes, they do. I was right then, and I'm right now. Correct then, and correct now. I don't want to be right. Especially when we're leaning to the left. So, the Bircher playbook is enforced among the GOP, and I guess you could say we're in trouble. I guess you could say that. But I'm going to tell you a little secret. There's been a demographic that has had, a lot of experience with this, usurpation of human rights. And they have never quit. Now, it being Hanukkah, we might as well just include our friends, too, who've been there from the beginning as well. People who had to change their names because they were escaping pogroms from Europe. Oh, I'm not Jewish. Really, I'm not Jewish because they don't want to, have anything befall them. But I'm also talking about the enslaved population of the United States who, in this modern time, continue to get out the vote, continue to be activists for civil and human rights, continue. So, yeah, it's tough, it sucks, we're in deep trouble, but there are vast populations in the United States where this is pretty much the norm for them. And yet, I guess you could even include my stepdad, Thomas Watanuki, Nisei, incarcerated in a concentration camp in New Mexico. Well, that was where he first started. And then fought for the 442nd. Go for broke. In Italy. And parts of Europe, too. Highly decorated. A believer in the American way of life and the American way. In spite of him being incarcerated in a concentration camp because of his race and nationality. Why? I had people, come on and be like trolls. Oh, it sounds like your stepdad had the Stockholm Syndrome. Why would anybody want to fight for a country that did that to them? Well, obviously that person doesn't believe in America now, do they? They hate America. They hate representative democracy. Now let's remember what Lewis Welch of the John Birchers proposed in terms of the strategy the GOP are following. Right down to this argument about, are we a representative democracy or are we a republic? And we got hammered with that we acquiesced and said, okay, we're a democratic republic. No, we're not. We're a democracy. I'm tired of acquiescing to these, Nazis. It's a Nazi variant, but only it's become a variant and mutated over time because very few seem to be vaccinated against Nazism anymore. Natural immunity is not enough, I'm telling you. Just because you're born American doesn't mean you're automatically against Nazism. You actually have to learn a little bit about democracy and America, all of its faults and our attempts to right the wrongs, to be able to be against Nazism, I suppose. So, I guess that means that we shouldn't be afraid of running for office because, there might be some little thing in our past that people will glom onto. Look, they got pedophiles, murderers, you name it. Look at Lauren Berbert's rap sheet, for instance. My God. You got Madison Cawthorn lying about being in the Naval Academy. Do you think that's enough to get him drummed out of politics? Hell no. He'll sit there and tell everybody what a good soldier is. But he was never one. Now, of course, I wasn't either, but there's a reason for it. No good military, no decent military would have me. And I didn't really want to be part of the indecent ones. No, I had some pretty and fairly severe sports injuries. I went to the recruiting office. I went through some of the process, but my sports injuries precluded me from being in the military because, as the recruiter said, we don't really have a doctor on the sidelines like you do in sports, where if you twist your knee, they come running out with their stethoscope. We don't have that on the battlefield. Okay. So I attempted to get into the Peace Corps and other volunteer services, which is funny because I couldn't even get into the Peace Corps because of my stint organizing and holding the first impeach Nixon rally west of the Rockies at Richard M. Nixon Park, that is now the Nixon Library in Yorba Linda, California. Not Whittier. He went to college in Whittier. He lived in Yorba Linda. And the house he was born in that his dad built. His dad also built the First Baptist Church in town there, too. Just a little tidbit of info. But anyway, it was at the park, mere steps from the house he was born in. And that action prevented me from working at the State Department, the Peace Corps, and a few other attempts to work for the federal government, even during the Carter administration. I tried to work at state for the Carter administration and said, nope, this is not, you did this Nixon thing. We can't have that. Oh, really? So, okay, well, that's fine. After a period of time working for Gulf Oil in production and exploration in a supervisory capacity, when I decided I did not want to work for them anymore, I put my efforts with UNICEF and subbed out to UNICEF to drill water wells in Latin America. Pretty much gratis. With the idea that, you volunteer for things. Because we're Americans and we want to make America better. And having educated kids in Latin America does. I got to tell you, it makes America better. I ought to do that here. Which brings me to another subject about loan forgiveness on student debt. I got a couple of people saying, yeah, well, that's kind of a touchy subject because my kids are barely making it after paying their loans. And my husband has to pay off the loans, too, that he took out on their stuff. And I'm like, well, part of this whole debt cancellation thing is getting you folks a rebate. At least if I was Poet Philosopher King running the show. Of course, if I was Poet Philosopher King running the show, there wouldn't have been a predatory for-profit scam like student loans. This is America. If you make the grade, you get to go to college. And making the grade means the grades. So we've had another Bircher effort over all this time to defund education. And they've been very successful at it. Change our public educational system into something else so that people don't know diddly about their country or how it works, so that when the Nazis say this is what we're doing, people will just go, well, look, they know what they're doing, look. Next thing you know, people are being loaded up on the trains. Now, I'm not talking Amtrak. So, yeah, we got our work cut out for us. I'm not giving up. Okay, what's on the rest of the menu here? Yeah, we have a rant all the time now. At the top, the GOP is ramping up the distractions as the midterms draw near. Indeed, they are. On the rest of the menu, religious organizations in support of abortion rights fight for access. Yes, there are religious organizations that believe a woman's right to choose. Some states are dropping dehumanizing terms for immigrants. That's a nice way of calling it racist, just so you know. And Montgomery, Alabama faces fines and a state lawsuit for changing the name of an avenue after Confederate traitor Jefferson Davis to honor civil rights lawyer Fred D. Gray. And they're using a law that the state has that prevents you from removing Confederate monuments and honorifics. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Dutch military police arrested a married couple who fled the country's mandated COVID quarantine restrictions. And France will not be held hostage to London's domestic politics on migration. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, and we thank Kelly for doing so. If you would look across the page from that chat room link near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, there is the link to our Patreon page, and if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it really helps us pay our bills and continue this powerhouse of resistance that has been resisting the Nazi takeover of the United States of America for over 10 years. Continuous 24/7, 365 resistance, and we've been able to do it because of your generosity. And how is that done? Well, how about if you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, and if you could afford to send those funds to us once a month? That helps us pay our bills, get the machinery that we need to continue updating, and the software too. And that then lets us continue resisting this hostile takeover of the United States of America. We take our civic duty quite seriously, and we really do thank you all, kidding aside. We thank you for your generosity. And I know it's the holiday season, and it's tough, but when you can, we could use the help. So thank you. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, it is so simple. You just go to @NetrootsRadio. How simple is that? That's right. Tom takes care of it, and we thank Tom for doing so. Follow me on Twitter @JusticePutnam. That's man spelled backwards, okay? We are the higher class of putts, just so everyone knows. Follow me @JusticePutnam. And I incidentally post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime, and then get that linked up on Twitter. So that's why you would want to follow me @JusticePutnam, because then you get the show notes and links. And those are very integral parts to this whole, West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy salon motif. And I also post it up on other social media platforms, and you know who they are. Our snoozing sous chef is doing his little snoozing right behind my shoulder. I let him sleep in my bed now. And yes, the studio has a bed. So the dog can sleep on it. And he does. We love him anyway. Hey, if you would like to follow the show on Twitter, do so @CookbookWest. And please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Alrighty. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy on this fine River City Hash Mondays is out of the Associated Press by Holly Meyer. On the day the Supreme Court hears arguments in a Mississippi abortion ban case, Sheila Katz plans to be at a nearby church. It is where the Jewish organization she leads is helping to host a morning interfaith service in support of abortion rights. That gathering and a planned rally outside the court are among the ways the National Council of Jewish Women and Like-Minded Faith Groups are challenging the erosion of abortion access in the U.S. We're going to start together as diverse groups of faith to pray and learn and sing together, Katz said. That feels like the right way to send the message that we are doing this work because of our faith and not in spite of it. Faith groups with progressive views on abortion rights say access is at a precarious point as the conservative majority Supreme Court considers challenges to 2 state laws, including a unique Texas measure that prohibits abortions before some even know they are pregnant. Well, you would expect that in Texas. The December 1 arguments in the Mississippi case will be closely watched. That's on Thursday, by the way, as the state's 15-week ban and possibly abortion rights nationwide hang in the balance. Things are dire, said Jamie Manson, president of Catholics for Choice. We're really at the precipice of losing a constitutional right that we thought would be guaranteed to us forever. Little did we know that court stacking by the Nazi GOP would change things so dramatically. Beyond rallies and religious services, faith groups backing access have filed briefs that include religious freedom defenses in the Mississippi case, Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization. They also have launched advocacy programs called on believers to speak out, contacted lawmakers, and published opinion columns. Those on the other side of the fight, including the religious, also are mobilizing, like we had vandalism at the Grants Pass Planned Parent Clinic just over the weekend. Isn't that nice? That's what they're doing in their mobilization efforts, violence and property destruction. And I'm telling you, it's not Antifa doing it. But Katz and her allies say it's a misconception that religious Americans in general are anti-abortion. People of faith are among those who support access and get abortions, Katz said. For too long, we've allowed a small but loud group from the religious right to dominate the narrative, and it's time we reclaim it, Katz said. A majority of Buddhist, Hindu, historically black Protestant, Jewish, mainline Protestant, Muslim, and Orthodox Christian adults support legal abortion in all or most cases, according to the Pew Research Center's Religious Landscape Study. According to the study, Catholics are split on the issue, while most evangelical Protestants, Jehovah's Witnesses, and members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints say abortion should be illegal in all or most cases. I believe that the God of our understanding is on the side of a woman's right to autonomy and agency and thriving, and so that means that God is on a woman's side to choose, said the Reverend Erica Forbes, an outreach and faith manager with the Texas Freedom Network, a progressive nonprofit that supports abortion access. Forbes isn't fighting for herself. She has already benefited from the reproductive rights advocacy of others. Forbes said she has had 2 abortions and went on to get an education and eventually became the parent she wanted to be. Forbes has organized clergy in Texas to march, testify, and write opinion columns, as well as activities like escorting people into clinics. You know, I did that in Oakland. And that was all the way back in the 90s. They've been doing this for a long time. Violence, the threats, the intimidation. We try to get people to vote, and they want to pull out their bullets. In August, the Texas Freedom Network launched a reproductive freedom congregation initiative. Interested congregations are asked to publicly affirm 3 principles, including promising not to judge or shame attendees for their reproductive choices. More than 30 churches have received the designation, and others are undertaking the process, Forbes said. People of faith backing access to abortion is not new. One example is the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice. The organization has roots in the clergy consultation service that connected women to safe abortion providers prior to Roe v. Wade, the 1973 Supreme Court decision legalizing the procedure nationwide. Today, one of the biggest hurdles is conveying the diversity of theological views on when life begins in the face of decades of messaging from well-funded abortion operatives. You know, anti-science, anti-intellectual, the know-nothings know everything, and they're going to force us to know it their way or else. Coronado of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. Luz Rivas remembers seeing the word on her mother's residency cards as a child, alien. In the stark terms of the government, it signaled her mother was not yet a citizen of the U.S., but to her young daughter, the word had a more personal meaning. Even though they were going through the naturalization process, it meant the family did not belong. I want other children of immigrants like me not to feel the same way I did, that my family did when we saw the word alien, said Rivas, now an assemblywoman in the California legislature. The Democratic lawmaker sought to retire the term, and this year authored a bill since signed into law that replaces the use of alien in state statutes with other terms as non-citizen or immigrant. Her effort was inspired by a similar shift earlier this year by the Biden administration. Immigrants and immigrant rights groups say the term, especially when combined with illegal, is dehumanizing and can have a harmful effect on immigration policy. The word became a focal point of debate in several states earlier this year as the number of migrants at the U.S.-Mexico border swelled and led to fierce backlash against Biden administration policies by Republican governors and lawmakers. Lawmakers in at least 7 states considered eliminating the use of alien and illegal in state statutes this year and replacing them with descriptions such as undocumented and non-citizen. Only 2 states, California and Colorado, actually made the change. State Senator Julie Gonzalez, who co-sponsored the new Colorado law, said during a legislative committee hearing that words such as illegal were dehumanizing and derogatory when applied to migrants and immigrants. Gonzalez said the legislation aimed to remove the only place in Colorado statute where illegal alien was used to describe people living in the U.S. illegally. It's not illegal. Well, I guess they always love to follow the rule of the law, don't they? I suppose that jaywalking is a crime by the rule of the law. But the actual crime that's supposedly committed here by these illegals is crossing the road outside of the crosswalk. Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Alabama's capital city last month removed the Confederate president's name from an avenue and renamed it after a lawyer known for his work during the Civil Rights Movement. Now, the state attorney general says the city must pay a fine or face a lawsuit for violating a state law protecting Confederate monuments and other long-standing memorials. Montgomery, last month, changed the name of Jeff Davis Avenue to Fred D. Gray Avenue. Gray, who grew up on that same street, represented Rosa Parks and others in cases that fought Deep South segregation practices and was dubbed by Martin Luther King Jr. as the chief counsel for the protest movement. The Alabama Attorney General's office sent a November 5th letter to Montgomery officials saying the city must pay a $25,000 fine by December 8th. Otherwise, the Attorney General will file suit on behalf of the state. Montgomery Mayor Stephen Reed said changing the name was the right thing to do. It was important that we show not only our residents here but people from afar that this is a new Montgomery. Reed, the city's first black mayor, said in a telephone interview. It was Reed's suggestion to rename the street after Gray. Oh, I see that the New South is fighting Reconstruction once again. Oh, they just never quit, do they? Rust never sleeps. You know, Nazism and this white national BS is like rust. It's not enough to punch it. You gotta rub it out. And you gotta rub it out every day. And just when you think you're done, you gotta start all over again. All right, with that stated, let's get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again. From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, The Trouble with Troubles. Well, Kenneth Branagh's new movie Belfast is placed in that city in the late 1960s, the era of the violent, sectarian so-called troubles there. It's really more of a coming-of-age story, and an autobiographical one at that. So in a project like this, the needle that requires threading is to not trivialize or whitewash a truly horrific period, but also not to make dark and bloody drama not suitable for holiday release. The way that's done here is by making a family-centric movie with fairly low narrative stakes and just enough era ambiance to keep it at least not divorced from reality. The story here is told from the point of view of Buddy, a 10-year-old, about Branagh's age in '69, whose perception of the theological Catholic-Protestant dispute is actually quite precious. His caring parents argue, but never to the point of ugliness. He has adorable and wise grandparents, with these characters brought off by Katrina Balfe as Buddy's mom, Judi Dench as his grandmother, Jamie Dornan as the dad, and the Irish patriarch standard-bearer Ciarán Hinds as grandpa. And they all do a fine job, even if you've seen these characters before. The shooting here is black and white with color reserved for certain scenes like trips to the movies. Musical direction is from Belfast native Van Morrison, who places several of his own radio hits early on. Seems somebody noticed this after they'd been cut in, and in later acts we get other music. And to seal the autobiographical hints, maybe overmuch, we see Buddy reading a Thor comic. We all idealize our youth, so it's probably unreasonable to expect a filmmaker not to as well. The acting, directing, and cinematography in Belfast rescue it from the saccharine, but not by much. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
He seems sorry.
We very clearly told him not to look up there.
I'm honestly impressed that he was able to do it.
Right? But did he balance on that big chair?
Yeah, I mean, I guess he'll just know what his gifts are this year.
I really thought we had hidden them well.
If they can find their presents, they can find a gun.
911, what is your emergency?
Every day, 8 kids and teens are unintentionally killed or injured by loaded and unlocked guns. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and End Family Fire.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
America certainly has an abundance of food, even though many Americans do not. Yet, we face a momentous choice of whether to pursue a food future rooted in the ethic of sustainable agriculture or one based on the exploitative ethic of agri-industry. What better symbol of agri-industry's vision of food than that ubiquitous Thanksgiving bird, the butterball turkey? The butterball has been hoisted onto our tables by huge advertising budgets and regular promotion payments to supermarkets. The birds themselves have been grotesquely deformed by industrial geneticists who created breasts so ponderous that the turkeys can't walk, stand up, or even reproduce on their own, thus earning the nickname dead-end birds. Adding torture to this intentional deformity, the industry sentences these once majestic fowl to dismal lives in tiny confinement cages inside the sprawling steel and concrete animal factories that scar America's rural landscape, monuments to greed-based corporate husbandry. As the eminent farmer-poet-activist Wendell Berry tells us, eating is a profound political act. It lets you and me vote for the butterball industrial model or choose to go back to the future of agriculture, which is the art and science of cooperating with rather than trying to overwhelm nature. That cooperative ethic is the choice of the remarkable good food uprising that has spread across the country in the past 30 years. Now, the fastest growing segment of the food economy, it is creating the alternative model of a local, sustainable, small-scale, community-based, organic, humane, healthy, democratic, and tasty food system for all. This is Jim Hightower saying, to take part in the good food movement and find small-scale farmers, artisans, farmers markets, and other resources in your area, visit www.localharvest.org.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. That was the day the National Labor Relations Board began hearings on an unfair labor practice brought by the International Mine, Mill, and Smelters. Mine Mill had been fighting the union-busting tactics at Eagle Pitcher Lead Company. The union had been organizing lead and zinc miners in the tri-state area of Kansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma. During the Great Depression, they built the union by emphasizing safer working conditions, stressing the hazards of silicosis and tuberculosis. In their book, Deadly Dust, Silicosis and the Politics of Occupational Disease, Gerald Markowitz and David Rosmer note that one of Mine Mill's demands included the elimination of the company clinic. They argued it was used to target and fire diseased workers rather than provide a safe work environment. Mine Mill also organized in other area industries to counteract the near total power of mine owners in the region. When the union called a strike at area mines in May 1935, the area's largest producer, Eagle Pitcher Lead, moved quickly to force a lockout and establish a company union. During the hearings, the union was limited in its ability to raise health and safety issues. They did win reinstatement and back pay for workers fired during the strike, but the case brought national attention to silicosis in the tri-state area. In a letter to Francis Perkins the following year, the head of the Cherokee County Central Labor Body hoped to secure legislation to compel the companies to install ventilation systems and safety devices. He noted the average life of a miner was 7 to 10 years, with many dying in 2 or 3 years. But sadly, a federal standard on silica was still decades away. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 50 degrees Fahrenheit, mostly cloudy skies this morning. Will become partly cloudy this afternoon. We had something more than just mist in the air overnight. Something more like a heavy drizzle because it's quite wet outside again. And winds will be light and variable. Highs will be in the mid-50s. A few clouds overnight. Lows in the low 40s. Winds remaining light and variable and partly cloudy tomorrow with highs in the upper 50s. Winds light and variable. We'll give you confirmed cases and confirmed deceased of coronavirus here in Jackson County tomorrow when it gets updated, if it gets updated. Pollen right outside the window here in Rogue River is rated as none. The air quality index is good for the region at 17 parts per million, though we are under an air stagnation warning, and the daytime UV index is low at level 1. Barometric pressure is rising at 30.31 inches. Visibility is at 5 miles, and relative humidity is at 92%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 37 and sunny. Brr. Paris is 42 and partly cloudy. Rome is 45 and partly cloudy. Kyiv is 48 and cloudy. Kabul is 40 degrees and partly cloudy. Hong Kong is 64 and clear. Tokyo is 45 and clear. Sydney, Australia is 65 and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 54 degrees and sunny. And New York is 40 degrees Fahrenheit and mostly cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Staff at Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Dutch military police said they had arrested a married couple who left a hotel where they were in quarantine after testing positive for COVID-19 and were attempting to flee the country. They were arrested in an airplane that was about to depart, the police known as the Mauritius said in a statement. It was unclear whether they had tested positive for the new Omicron coronavirus variant. Amsterdam newspaper Het Parool reported that the couple, a Spanish man and Portuguese woman, were trying to fly to Spain. Dozens of passengers who tested positive for COVID-19 after arriving on 2 flights from South Africa on Friday are being kept in quarantine at a hotel near Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport. The Mauritius statement said the pair, whose names and nationalities were not released, had been turned over to health authorities, but we know their nationalities now, Spanish and Portuguese. In all, 61 of the more than 600 passengers on the flights from Johannesburg and Cape Town tested positive for COVID-19. Most are quarantining at the hotel, though some Dutch residents are allowed to quarantine at home. Dutch health authorities said earlier yesterday, Sunday, that at least 13 of the 61 are infected with the newly identified Omicron variant of the virus.
Je te donne, c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Juliet Japkiro and Naomi Olive of Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. France is ready for a serious discussion with Britain on issues relating to illegal migration, but will not be held hostage to London's domestic politics, the country's Interior Minister Gerald Darmanin said. The two countries are already at loggerheads over post-Brexit trading rules and fishing rights, and last week relations soured further after 27 people died trying to cross the Channel. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson wrote to President Macron, setting up 5 steps the two countries could take to deter migrants from making the perilous journey. One of those, sending illegal migrants back to France, particularly angered Paris. France responded, by canceling an invitation to British Interior Minister Priti Patel to attend a meeting with European counterparts to discuss the issue after Johnson published the letter on Twitter. He added that London's tone in private was not the same as in public, and France has been handling the issue of illegal migration to Britain for 25 years, and now it is time for London to wake up, Darmanin said. If migrants are coming to Calais, Dunkirk, or northern France, it's because they are attracted by England, especially the labor market, which means you can work in England without any identification. Britain needs France's cooperation to curb the flow of migrants escaping war. Britain must take its responsibility and limit its economic attractiveness. Well. That brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.